The jet engines hummed beneath the polished floors of the first-class cabin. Flight 1473 from Los Angeles to Boston was boarding, and among the small flurry of executives, celebrities, and diamond-dripping passengers, he walked in, tall, composed, wearing a baseball cap low over his forehead. Tom Brady. Jessica had been working flights for 10 years, and she could spot a high-maintenance traveler from 2 gates away. She barely glanced at his face before zeroing in on the slim black cord around his neck, from which dangled a small, dull pendant. Nothing flashy, nothing elegant. It looked like something a teenage boy might buy at a surf shack in Venice Beach. "Must be nice," she muttered under her breath, adjusting her scarf and smoothing her bun. "Private jets in the shop?" He took his seat in 1A without a word, tucking his duffel beneath the seat like any other passenger. Jessica had heard of him, of course. Who hadn't? But she never understood the obsession. Just another entitled athlete in her book, rich, famous, and probably bored enough to slum it in commercial for kicks. She moved down the aisle, helping another passenger with an overhead bag, but her eyes kept drifting back to the necklace. She couldn't help herself when she returned to offer him his pre-flight beverage. "Sparkling water with lemon, please," he said, voice low and calm. She handed him the glass, eyeing the necklace. "Interesting piece, let me guess. Souvenir from a high school spring break." He looked up. Just for a second. Their eyes locked. And something in his expression changed. Not angry, not offended. Just distant. Jessica smiled tightly, trying to make light of it. "I mean, not what I'd expect from you. I figured you'd wear something a bit more GQ." He took a sip of his drink, then leaned back. "It's my dad's." A beat passed. Jessica blinked. "Oh." "It was the last thing he gave me before he died," he added, his voice even. "He wore it every day for 30 years. Her stomach turned. The cabin lights dimmed. Boarding doors were closing. But Jessica stood there, face burning. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "No problem," he replied. But he turned away, pulled his cap lower, and didn't speak again. For the first time in years, Jessica felt like she'd stepped over a line she didn't even know was there. The rest of the cabin bustled with idle chatter, clicking seat belts, and the usual pre-takeoff energy. But in seat 1A, the air felt different, thicker. She walked back to the galley, trying to shake it off. "It's not your job to be best friends with the passengers," she whispered to herself, but the words rang hollow. As the plane taxied down the runway and the cabin tilted skyward, Jessica glanced down the aisle one more time. He was staring out the window, one hand gently resting on the small battered pendant hanging just over his heart. Want to know what happened next? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. You won't believe how this story unfolds. The hum of altitude filled the cabin as the plane leveled out at cruising speed. Jessica leaned against the galley counter, trying to shake the odd weight pressing against her chest. She'd said worse things to passengers before, offhand remarks, sarcastic comments, but this one felt different. "Hey, Jess," whispered Daniel, the flight attendant working in business class. "Is that Brady in 1A? Jessica nodded, pouring a Diet Coke with a shaky hand. "Man, I didn't even know he flew commercial," Daniel said, eyes wide. "What's he like?" She forced a smile. "Quiet," Daniel grinned. "Bet he's one of those mysterious types. You talked to him?" Jessica hesitated. "Yeah. He might have said something dumb." "Oh no, what'd you do?" "I made a joke about his necklace," she paused. "It was his dad's. He passed away." Daniel winced. "Yikes. You think he took it personally?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He said, no problem, but you could feel it." "I messed up." Jessica prided herself on reading people, moods, dynamics, what to say and when, but this was a miss she couldn't ignore. A chime sounded. The captain announced smooth skies ahead. Time for first-class service. Jessica took a deep breath and began the round. Most passengers were buried in laptops or dozing under blankets. At 1A, Tom Brady had his tray table out, flipping slowly through a paperback. Some well-worn biography with a creased spine. She approached cautiously. "Mr. Brady," she said, keeping her tone soft, "we're about to serve dinner. Do you have a preference? Grilled chicken or vegetarian pasta?" He glanced up. His face was unreadable. "Chicken, thanks." She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Coming right up." As she turned to move on, he said quietly, "My dad gave me that necklace the night before my first playoff game. He told me it reminded him of who he was. Said maybe it would remind me too." Jessica froze. She looked at him, really looked this time. Not as a celebrity, not as a story to tell at the crew lounge, but as someone carrying something heavy that no one else could see. "I'm really sorry," she said again, and this time her voice wasn't performative. "I wasn't trying to be rude. I was just trying to be funny," he finished. "Yeah," she admitted. "Sometimes I forget there's a person behind the seat number." He gave a small smile, the first one she'd seen. "We all do that sometimes." She exhaled, relieved. "Thanks for not reporting me. I'm not here to ruin anyone's day," he said, leaning back, "just trying to get home." The moment passed like a quiet wave. Jessica continued with service, but something about the exchange stuck in her mind. He could have ignored her, he could have reported her, he could have made it a thing. Instead, he shared a little more of himself. It was rare, and it reminded her of something she hadn't felt in a long time: humility. Later, as she refilled his water and cleared his tray, he nodded politely. The tension between them eased. But she kept glancing at the necklace. It was old, sure, faded and chipped, but now she saw it for what it was. Not a souvenir, but a relic, a piece of a man's identity, handed down. She'd spent years brushing past people, assuming their stories. Maybe it was time to start asking instead. It was near midnight, somewhere over the Midwest, when Jessica found herself in the galley again, unwrapping a protein bar she didn't want, but needed for the shift. First class was quiet. Most passengers had reclined, headphones in, blankets pulled to their chins, except for 1A. Tom Brady's reading light was still on. Jessica hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the aisle. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she wanted to apologize again, or maybe she just didn't want to leave things on a hollow note. He looked up as she approached. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. "Tea, maybe?" "I'm good, thanks." She started to turn away, then paused. "Do you mind if I ask something?" He raised an eyebrow, curious. "That night before your playoff game when your dad gave you the necklace, what did he actually say?" For a long second she thought he might shut her down, but instead he closed the book in his lap, placed it on the tray table and rested his hands over the pendant. He said, "Don't let the world tell you who you are." "You already know." Jessica nodded slowly. "That's powerful." "I didn't get it at the time," he said. "I was 23, cocky, thought I knew everything. But later, after losses, injuries, criticism, I realized he was right. People are always going to try and define you. You either let them, or you remember who you are." The way he said it wasn't rehearsed or polished, just honest. Jessica leaned against the opposite seat. "My dad left when I was 11. I guess I stopped expecting that kind of advice from anyone." Tom's gaze softened. "That's hard." She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't mean to make this deep. Just, your story stuck with me." He nodded. "It's not about football. It's never really been about that. It's about staying grounded when everything tries to pull you out of yourself." The plane rocked slightly in mild turbulence. Jessica gripped the armrest beside her and smiled. "You're not what I expected. And you're not the worst flight attendant I've ever had," he replied, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." There was a pause. Comfortable for once. "You know," he said, "I fly this route when I'm visiting my mom in Boston. She's getting older, doesn't travel much anymore." Jessica nodded. "It's a nice thing, making time for that. Most people don't. I missed a lot over the years. Games fame, it doesn't replace being present." She thought about all the birthdays she'd missed on layovers, all the family dinners cut short by a schedule change. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I get that." Another beat passed. Tom glanced toward the front of the cabin. "Well, I should probably try to get some sleep." Jessica nodded. "Of course." "Thanks for talking." He gave a small nod and pulled the blanket over his lap. Back in the galley, Jessica leaned against the counter, the protein bar untouched in her hand. She'd boarded the flight annoyed to be working first class, assuming it would be just another night, another demanding VIP. But in seat 1A wasn't a symbol or a tabloid face, just someone trying to hold on to what mattered. She suddenly understood something her 10 years in the air had never taught her. You never know the story behind someone's silence. Morning light spilled through the cabin windows, casting a soft golden glow across the faces of sleeping passengers. Boston was less than an hour away. Jessica moved quietly through the aisles, checking belts and blankets, collecting trays from overnight service. Her mind wasn't on the tasks. It kept drifting back to their conversation in the dark. Tom's voice, the way his fingers had instinctively brushed the pendant when he spoke about his father. In seat 1A, he was awake, sipping coffee and watching the clouds stretch endlessly below them. "Good morning," Jessica said gently as she reached his row. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Well enough." "You?" She smiled faintly. "Flight attendants don't sleep." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough." There was a lull in conversation, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Jessica hesitated. "Can I ask you something else?" Tom looked up. "Sure." "What does it feel like, knowing millions of people think they know who you are, but they don't really?" He thought for a moment, swirling his coffee. "Strange. At first it's exciting, fame, attention, then it becomes pressure, and eventually you realize it doesn't matter unless the people close to you really know who you are." Jessica nodded slowly. "I think I've been wearing a version of myself for years," smiling, being quick with a joke. "I didn't even notice when it stopped being real." Tom studied her for a moment. "It's easy to lose track. Especially when your job's to take care of everyone else." She looked at him, surprised. "That's exactly it." The captain's voice broke over the intercom, announcing descent. Seatbelts clicked, passengers stirred, stretching, yawning, the calm before landing. Jessica returned to her jump seat but kept glancing toward 1A. Something about the night had shifted her, not just the awkward moment or the apology, but the quiet truth that followed. Maybe it was the honesty. Maybe it was that someone like him, who seemed untouchable, had shared something so deeply personal, without expectation. As the plane dipped toward Boston, the familiar patchwork of neighborhoods and tree-lined streets came into view. Jessica's phone buzzed in her pocket, a delayed text from her sister. "Dinner Sunday still on? Let me know," Mom asked. She stared at it for a long second. Her first instinct was to ignore it, like always, blame her schedule, dodge the obligation. But something in her chest tugged different now. Maybe it was time to stop floating past the people who mattered. After touchdown, the usual scramble of bags and jackets began. The first-class curtain stayed closed as passengers filed out. Tom remained seated, letting the rush pass. Jessica walked to his row to say goodbye. "Thanks for flying with us," she said, trying not to sound too formal. He stood, grabbing his duffel. "Thank you for the tea and the talk." She smiled. "And thank you for not reporting me to corporate." He laughed. "That necklace has been through worse." Then he paused. "Hey, Jess? Yeah? If you ever decide to stop flying, maybe write a book. You're a good listener." She blinked, surprised. "I'll think about it." He gave a small nod and headed down the jet bridge. Jessica stood there for a moment, staring at the now empty seat 1A. Not every flight changed you. Most didn't, but every once in a while someone boarded with something to teach you, about grief, about perspective, about yourself. And if you were lucky, you learned before the wheels touched down. The crew disembarked through a back door of the terminal, tugging roller bags behind them as Logan Airport buzzed into its usual rhythm. Jessica lingered. She wasn't due back in the air for 3 days, but instead of rushing to the employee shuttle or texting a rideshare, she walked slowly through the terminal. The conversation with Tom lingered in her thoughts, like the warmth of leftover sunlight. She'd expected to spend the night serving drinks and tolerating egos. Instead, she'd been given something else, an uncomfortable moment, an unexpected apology, and a reminder that humility could show up wearing a hoodie and scuffed sneakers. Outside, the Boston wind had that early spring bite, brisk but not bitter. She pulled her coat tight and opened her phone. "Dinner's at 6, you coming?" Her sister had texted again. Jessica hesitated, thumbs hovering. Then she typed, "Yeah, I'll be there." 2 days later, Jessica stood in her sister's kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta, while her niece bounced a soccer ball in the hallway. Her mother was already mid-story, reminiscing about a trip they took when Jessica was a teenager, something she barely remembered. But she stayed present. She asked questions, she listened, and she didn't check her phone once. Later that night, after hugs and goodbyes, she walked the 3 blocks to her apartment. Inside, she kicked off her shoes, threw her uniform into the laundry, and dropped onto the couch. Something nudged at her. She opened her laptop, pulled up a blank document, and typed a title across the top. Seat 1A, Things You Don't See at 38,000 Feet. She stared at it for a long moment, then began to write. Not about football, not even about Tom, really, but about empathy, about how easy it is to move through life assuming we know people, what they carry, what they mean, and how one quiet moment with a stranger can change the way you see your own reflection. 2 months later, Jessica walked through the airport again, same gate, same airline. But something had shifted. She didn't roll her eyes at VIPs. She didn't tune out passengers before they spoke. She started asking real questions, listening instead of filling silence. And when someone asked her if she'd ever met anyone famous, she'd just smile and say, "A couple." But the ones who stay with you are the ones who never tried to act like they were. One afternoon between flights, she sat in the crew lounge with a coffee and opened her email. Subject line, "Your essay touched me, TB." Her stomach flipped. She clicked. "I don't usually read things people write about me, but someone forwarded your piece. I wanted to say thank you. My dad would have liked what you wrote. Tom." She closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a long minute, not needing anything else to validate what she already felt. That night had mattered. Not because of who he was, but because of what he reminded her to be. We often move through life at cruising altitude, detached, comfortable, too fast to notice the person seated beside us. But sometimes, if we're lucky, someone will reach across the invisible aisle with something real, and if we're paying attention, it might just change how we land. So if this story moved you even a little, maybe it's time you looked closer too. And hey, if you like this, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more real stories coming, and the next one? It was picked just for you. You're going to love it.